Coming up in this episode, the Warriors appear to have completed their 21-man roster ahead of training camp at the start of next month. I'll go through it all position by position, the expected starting lineup, and everything else you need to know. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Just before I start on the Warriors-related news, I just wanted to clarify something from last episode. I was really thankful and appreciative of some of the nice comments in the YouTube section after that last episode. And I just wanted to clarify, I apologize if I made it sound like my old man has just passed away. He passed away in April last year. So I've had nearly 18 months now to adjust to life without him, but it took until last Friday for my siblings and I to work out what we were doing with his ashes. And from the YouTube comments, I don't know, I feel like I made it sound like he'd only just passed away, which is not the case. And they do say that time doesn't necessarily heal, but I think it does. And I think I'm pretty content with life now in a way that it was not necessarily the case when things were so emotional, obviously, last April. And it's been a while now. And I do think, even though people don't necessarily subscribe to it, I do think time heals when it comes to losing loved ones. And I'm pretty content with the fact that I know he lived a full life. He was 77. When he passed, didn't have too much pain or anything like that. So I just thought I wanted to clarify that because I didn't want to misread people into thinking that he'd only just passed away. So anyway, let's move on to Warriors related activity. If you haven't checked out last episode, you can forget everything that I just said. But anyway, let's get on to some Warriors related stuff because a lot of roster stuff happening here over the past few days. Of course, training camp is now less than 2 weeks away, October 1 in Hawaii. I read, I think a couple of days ago now, Warriors basketball is 20 days away. And I was like, whoa, like that really hit home to me how close this is now. I think we're down to 18 days. October 5 matchup against the Clippers to kind of end that training camp in Hawaii before some of the more normal preseason games, I suppose, which I think starts on October 9. But we've got some news here in terms of the roster, which appears now to be completed. Now, since last episode, the Warriors have signed Yuri Collins to an E10 Exhibit 10 training camp contract, according to Keith Smith of Spotrac. And now, just hours ago, Michael Scott of Hoops Hype has reported that the Warriors have signed Donta Scott and Javen Johnson to training camp contracts as well. So in terms of these guys, familiar faces to the Warriors organization, Yuri Collins and Javen Johnson both played in Santa Cruz last season. They've both played in summer league programs for the Warriors. I think they were also both on training camp contracts last season as well. Donta Scott, he went undrafted after 5 years at Maryland earlier this year in June's NBA draft. Played for the Warriors in summer league. I think played 5 games in Vegas, averaged 5.6 points, 3.6 rebounds, just over 17 minutes a game. Look, these guys are not, unless something unforeseen happens, which I think it's completely very unlikely, these guys will not be on either the main roster or two-way contracts. They, of course, are eligible for two-way contracts, but I do not think they will be on Golden State in any way, shape, or form come the season opener against the Portland Trail Blazers on, October 23. These deals, these E10 deals, are basically designed for a team to complete their G League affiliate, which for the Warriors is in Santa Cruz. So what happens with an E10 contract is that it is a one-year deal, but it is completely non-guaranteed. And most of these guys around the league that sign E10 deals will find themselves waived by basically we see the completion of the preseason game. So I remember last year, the Warriors played their final preseason game. I think it was against the Spurs, and the likes of Rudy Gay, and it might have been Yuri Collins, Javen Johnson as well, were all waived. And so you see that pretty quickly in like literally in the couple of hours following the last preseason game. So this is, again, basically the E10 deal is a way to complete the Santa Cruz roster for the Warriors, because there is an incentive there for guys that do sign E10 deals. If after they're waived, they stick around with the G League affiliate for at least 60 days, there is an optional bonus of up to $75,000 there. So it's basically a way for teams to incentivize players to come in. Hey, you're going to be on training camp. You're going to be on a training camp contract. You'll be around the team for that. And in preseason, very, very unlikely that you are going to be on the team come the season opener or after the preseason. But you do have that financial incentive to stick around with the G League affiliate, and again in this case for the Warriors with Santa Cruz, where obviously Yuri Collins and Javen Johnson played last season, and of course Jackson Rowe as well, who I failed to mention. He got a training camp contract, E10, straight after Summer League in July. So that quartet basically feels a bit brutal to say them just making up the numbers in training camp, but they essentially are. It's just a way, again, to complete the roster in Santa Cruz for the Warriors. So we'll wait and see. Obviously, it does provide those guys an opportunity regardless, and that has to be mentioned. They've obviously got the chance to impress here. And I do recall last preseason, I think Javen Johnson got out there a little bit, because obviously these guys for many of the preseason games, like Steve will run the main guys for the first half and then they'll rest, and these guys will get opportunity to play during the preseason games. And I remember being relatively impressed by Javen Johnson, thinking, 6'6", decent size, decent athleticism, can shoot the ball from three. I was having a look at his G League numbers last season. Over 70% of his field goal attempts came from beyond the arc last season, where he shot a healthy 37.5% from three-point range. Good enough. I was actually somewhat impressed by him. I wouldn't have been surprised if he got a two-way contract last season. Obviously, that didn't come to fruition. But he'll get another opportunity, as will these other three guys. And it's not necessarily the opportunity that's going to arise now, because, again, barring unforeseen circumstances, I don't think that will happen. But further down the track, if something does happen, few injuries, maybe a 10-day contract here or there, who knows what can happen. And therefore, if you're these quartet of players, you're trying to take every opportunity that you can. And this is seen as an opportunity, there's no doubt, even though they are kind of on the back burner, and it's very unlikely, again, that they stick around in Golden State past the preseason games. Anyway, the last bit of news as well before I get into the full training camp roster. It was also reported by Keith Smith of Spotrac that the Warriors are one of 4 teams that have or had that have or will have a workout with Nazir Little, of course, former Phoenix Suns and Portland Trailblazers forward, played 4 years with the Trailblazers, showed some impressive signs, I thought, over his third and fourth seasons, where particularly that third season, I think he averaged 9.8 points, played nearly 26 minutes a game, and then got traded in the Damian Lillard deal last offseason, goes to Phoenix, where I thought that was going to be a reasonable pickup for them, and it turned out to be anything but. And pretty brutal decision from them, given he entered last season starting a 4-year, $28 million contract. He played 1 year, played less than 500 total minutes for the Phoenix Suns, and that was enough for them. And they just decided to waive and stretch his contract, which means, he had 3 years remaining on his deal. And Phoenix think, seen enough. We would rather have you go away, open up a roster spot, and we'll pay you $3 million a year until 2030 to do that. And so he's now looking for his next opportunity. I think the Celtics, the Kings, and some other team, I think, I can't remember what the 4 were, Celtics, Kings, Warriors, and someone else, who working out Nazir Little. It seems by this more recent news in terms of the Warriors signing Dante Scott and Javen Johnson to training camp contracts, it would suggest that Nazir Little, or any other free agent for that matter, will not be coming to the Warriors in training camp and pushing for a spot, which essentially means that not only is their training camp roster fully completed, but that their main roster heading into next season is fully completed, unless there is a trade of some kind. And there is and I'll get into this in a minute, there is something else that they need to kind of shuffle the decks with to work out. But I think the fact that they're not bringing in any of these free agents, of course, they've worked out Bruno Caboclo, extended an invitation to Davis Bertans, worked out Troy Brown Jr., who still is a free agent, who is a guy that I suppose could have come in training camp and tried to fight for a spot. And, of course, now Nazir Little. Seems like the Warriors don't have any interest anymore anyway in any of these free agents. And I don't think Nazir Little, I think he deserves another opportunity in the league. I think he showed enough in his last couple of seasons in Portland to suggest that there's some upside there. He's only 25 years old, whatever he is. He's young enough to suggest that there's some upside there, then he could be intriguing. But for the Warriors, he's 6'5" and shoots 33% for his career from 3-point range. I've completely, this entire last few weeks, last couple of months, one of my big points is the Warriors needing spacing and shooting in the front court. That's not what Nazir Little provides. And so for a team that is already got a heap of depth, what's the point? It's just adding depth in a way that's not he doesn't provide a difference making element like a Bertans would have as a 6'10" shooter in terms of providing that spacing in the front court. What would Nazir Little have provided the Warriors that was any different to what they've already got in terms of like the size, the athleticism in the front court, but not necessarily the shooting? I don't know. I don't mind him as a player. I hope he gets another opportunity elsewhere. I just, for both him and the Warriors, I didn't see the point of it necessarily, which was the same with a lot of these free agents, to be fair, because when you are a deep roster like the Warriors are, any player that you potentially bring in has to bring a point of difference to stand out from guys 5 through 14 on the roster, really, let's be honest. And that's why Bertans, out of all these guys, he's been poor and been pretty much unplayable the last couple of seasons, but at least you can point and say, he's got a history of being a reasonable NBA player. He's still young enough, and he does provide that different element that the Warriors don't necessarily have. Anyway, he signs overseas in Dubai. It is what it is. This looks like the training camp roster, and as a result, also looks like the main roster heading into next season. So let's go through the 21-man training camp roster right now. The guards. Now, this is kind of, I'm going off basketball reference here. There's probably, again, I'll go through it some more afterwards, but there's probably some guards here that I would classify as forwards, particularly on the Warriors. Anyway, guards. Steph Curry, Brandon Pajemski, DeAnthony Melton, Buddy Hield, Gary Payton II, Moses Moody, Lindy Waters III, Daquan Plowden on a two-way, as is Pat Spencer and Reese Beekman, and then Yuri Collins on an Exhibit 10 contract. Forwards, Draymond Green, Jonathan Kuminga, Andrew Wiggins, Kyle Anderson, Guy Santos, Jackson Rowe, Javen Johnson, Dante Scott, that last three all on Exhibit 10 contracts. Leaving centers, Trace Jackson Davis and Kevon Looney. So what stands out? I mean, two centers. Two centers, all right. TJD and Looney on a 21-man roster. And then the glut of guards. 11 guards, we're spacing it out as 11 guards, 8 forwards, 2 centers. The fact that none of the Exhibit 10 guys or two-way guys are even centers is interesting. Now, as I said before, a lot of the guards here, I would classify as forwards. If I had to kind of predict what will happen next season, I'd imagine GP2, Moody, Lindy Waters, Plowden if he gets on the floor, maybe even Buddy Hield. Those guys are probably playing the majority of their minutes at small forward. That's just what the roster suggests. And so I did that grouping by what Basketball Reference said in terms of their position. But it's still concerning nonetheless. And for a fan base that's over the last couple of seasons really been disappointed with the amount of small guards or just the amount of guards in general on the roster, I think looking at this, that's probably a fair assessment again, to be disappointed with the lack of size and the glut of guards that are on this Warrior roster. And not only that, but there's so many that kind of feel a similar role in terms of the 2-3 position rather than a point guard, which, I've said previously throughout the entirety of this offseason, the Warriors' lack of genuine point guards. Steph, Pods, of course, is probably going to get those backup minutes, although a couple episodes ago I mentioned about Kyle Anderson and the potential of him actually being the Warriors' backup point guard. Go check that out if you haven't already. But Pods, he's probably going to be slated to be the backup point guard, along with Slow-Mo doing some ball handling duties and whatnot. But we don't actually have a history of him doing that, so that's kind of a wait and see. And then beyond that, it's really Spencer and Beekman on two-way contracts right now, which is not great in terms of the point guard options, particularly when you've got so many other guards on the roster at the moment. And then the centers. The centers with TJD and Looney. So the big question mark here is a guy that I did not mention in those list of 21 players is Quinten Post, right? And so we still don't know what the Warriors are doing with him. Of course, we're months down the track now from when he was drafted 52nd overall by the Warriors in June's NBA draft. He came back, returned from injury for the final 2 games of Summer League, played pretty well, had an introductory press conference with Golden State, which would suggest that, okay, this guy's hanging around. He's not doing an introductory press conference if they're just going to go send him to Europe or international to play as a kind of draft and stash guy, which sometimes happens with these picks in the 50s kind of thing. So what's going to happen with Quinten Post? I think the most likely scenario is that he ultimately takes Reece Beekman's spot on a two-way contract, which I know GSW CBA on Twitter has already kind of referenced after these signings today with Dante Scott and Jabin Johnson, because a lot of people asking, well, what's going on with Quinten Post? That would be the most likely scenario, I think, but we're just going to have to wait and see there. He's going to be on the roster in some way, shape, or form. So technically it's really a 22-man training camp roster because Quinten Post will be there. He's just not signed in any way, shape, or form right now, which is interesting. And I'm assuming he has to be signed to be at training camp. So I'd expect something to happen here over the next couple of weeks. I don't know what's going to happen, but again, the most likely scenario I think would be that he takes Beekman's spot on a two-way contract. That's kind of what I thought for the majority of the last couple of months, particularly after the marketing and stuff didn't happen, because I thought, well, if there's a trade that happens and it's like a 2-for-1, 3-for-1 trade where roster spots open up, then Quinten Post grab one of those. There is the unlikely possibility that he takes Guy Santos' spot on the main roster. Again, I don't think that will happen. So, yeah, we'll wait and see with Quinten Post, but that's kind of the one big question mark just regarding this roster ahead of training camp and preseason. But other than that, this looks to be the roster for training camp and therefore the 14-man roster heading into next season with the trio of two-way contracts as well. And it is alarming, I suppose, when you lay it out like this and see 2 centers out of 21 players, 3 out of 22 if we want to include Post, obviously, and one, just generally one veteran center. You've got Quinten Post in his rookie year and TJD in his second year. I don't know. Loon's coming off probably his worst year of his career, or at least the worst year of his last 3, 4, 5 years. And so, I mean, what are we doing here? There's a real lack of size, and I think, again, laying it out like this and how alarming it looks to see only 2 centers, I do think it means that Draymond has to start at center at the start of next season. I just don't think you can have, you need to have a third string big, I think, and maybe Quinten Post is that, but I'd just be surprised if the Warriors enter next season with only 2 centers on the roster plus Quinten Post and then make one of those bigs a starter. I don't know. It's a wait and see game, obviously, and what happens in training camp and the preseason games. I'm sure Steve will do plenty of experimenting where we'll see TJD start. Heck, if Loon shows something in preseason, he might even get some starts. It's a wait and see. but I'd be surprised, and that's why I think, again, laying out this roster, I'd be surprised if Draymond's not starting at center, which, I mean, I spoke a heap about already in terms of I don't think that is a viable option for an entire season. I think you can get away with it in spits and spurts. They obviously did it plenty over kind of the second half of last season, but even at the end of it, we saw the Warriors go 9-2 in the last 11 games when TJD came into the starting lineup after JK got injured, played alongside Draymond. And Draymond was so much more effective defensively when he had another big next to him. And unfortunately for the Warriors, this has been an ongoing issue with how do you balance the offense and the defense. And I think Draymond TJD is a lot more viable than Draymond Loon, because at least TJD gives you that athletic threat in terms of being a rim runner, lob threat, all this kind of stuff, as Loon was just a complete non-offensive threat whatsoever. But there's still question marks there in terms of the spacing. Like, can we get Draymond to shoot 40% from three again? Hopefully, but I'm not necessarily banking on it. What does that mean for Kuminga, who hopefully should rise to being the second best player on the team this season, and certainly the second best scorer, but like, is he even going to be a starter? Does he start at the three? Well, that just completely makes the spacing issues even greater if it's him, Draymond, TJD. What does that mean for Wiggins? Wiggins is kind of, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but Wiggins is a bit of an unknown, obviously, at the moment, and rightfully so. Like, if he's not at training camp or not in these preseason games or starts the season slow, I'm not going to be surprised, and I'm not going to blame him for it whatsoever. Like, he's obviously going through a really, really tough time at the moment, and yeah, I'm not going to be complaining if he's not there at all, or if he's starting a bit slowly and behind everyone else. Like, it is what it is. Does that mean that maybe he could move back to the bench at to start the season, or when he comes back, whenever it may be, whatever's going on there? Possibly, but then again, that leaves question marks on a Kuminga, Green, TJD front court and how viable that is from a spacing perspective and an offensive perspective. I think right now, the general consensus would be a starting lineup of Steph, Pods, Wiggs, JK, Draymond. I think that would be the most likely scenario right now. And if, again, there's so many things to play out here across training camp and the preseason, that's far from locked in. But again, I would be surprised with only two centers on the roster if Draymond wasn't actually the starting center. I mean, do we want to call him a center and just add another center and have Draymond there as a center? He's probably going to be the starter, right? Now, that doesn't mean I'm not labeling him as a center, but the Warriors are just going to start three forwards, right, and two guards, and that's probably the way it's going to be. You can probably get it, like, looking at the first two games, you can probably get away with it against Portland, maybe back Ayton's over points and rebounds. I don't know. It's even going to be interesting with them because they do have. I mean, you can get away with it from a perspective of they should win the game regardless, but in terms of, like, Portland have legitimate size. In fact, they've got too many bigs at the moment. They've got Ayton, Robert Williams. I really like Dwight Reith as an Australian. He had a really good rookie year. And then they've obviously just drafted Donovan Clingan. They've got too many bigs. They need to make a trade where they get rid of at least one, if not two, of their bigs. Maybe the Warriors could look at that. But they should still win the game, but they do have some bigs that could cause issues for the Warriors in that game. And then Utah, I mean, I think we can get away with, again, I mean, Lowry's going to be out there, but is Walker Kessler starting for them? I'd imagine he is. Again, you could probably get away with that, and you're still expecting to win that game. So this is the thing, is you don't want those two games to kind of give you a false sense of security in terms of, you win those two games and you think, oh, this lineup's working really, really well, and Draymond's going well at center and whatnot, and then run into some of the big dogs around the league and, Jokic, Embiid, Giannis, whoever it is, and then you're like, oh, crap, this doesn't really actually work and we're going to have to go back to a TJD. And yeah, I don't want a season, this is my biggest issue, is I don't want a season where Steve is constantly changing the starting lineup. I've been really big on this, that the best teams in the league have a really solidified starting lineup, a really solidified like top 7 or 8. And things obviously change throughout the course of the regular season. There's injuries and all that kind of stuff. But usually the best teams have the most continuity. And that's what the Warriors didn't have last season. Even by the end of the season, we were like, what is the best starting lineup? Yeah, cool. Like this Draymond TJD front court is 9-2 and the Warriors are going really well, but like there's still the Kuminga question mark. All right. I just want Steve and this team to work out what they're doing from early in the season in terms of the lineups and the rotations, because too much change and it's just a mess. Really, it's just a mess. And that is probably my biggest concern going into next season with how deep this roster is, because there are plenty of guys that could be starting and plenty of guys that could be playing significant minutes. And there's some guys who should be playing, who won't be playing. And I don't know. It's just the downfalls of having a deep roster and not having the kind of hierarchy that I've spoken so much about. Anyway, I might finish it up there. I don't think I have anything else. Thank you very much for listening to this episode or watching on YouTube if you've got through to this point. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. Other than that, if there is any other Warrior news, then I'll be sure to talk about it. I might delve a bit more into kind of topics and things to watch in training camp on the next episode. That'll probably be in a couple of days. But until then, enjoy your rest of your week.